fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. We are back, Salt Strong Unchurched, with a very, very special guest. 2 weeks ago, I did a podcast solo, and I referenced a book that I had finished reading. And for those of you watching, I'll hold it up. It is called The Rise of the Nuns, Dr. James Emery White, who, from what I can tell, writes like a book a year. Like he's got 20-something books. And I've now purchased one of his most recent books that I'll be doing a little review on soon. But I wanted to really dive deep into this. I really only covered one page out of this entire book, and it hit me hard because I know we've got a lot of followers who are younger, and I know we have a lot of members who love fishing and have either been turned off by church, maybe they were burned by a church, maybe, and I've shared a lot of my background. I went to, in my opinion, was kind of a boring church that was more focused on rituals and not about, stuff that maybe I was concerned about. And I know James talks a lot about just a cause. And I had a lot of questions, is there really God? And if so, I know you talk about this in the book, who cares? Like, why should we care about all this stuff? And how is this going to help me? How is it going to benefit me? And so I reached out to my friend, Drew, who had a connection, and all of a sudden here we are. So welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
So do you write a book a year? Pretty much. Jeez.
I have been in a rhythm about a book about every 12 to 18 months. And I love to write. And so I'm very appreciative that I get to do that. Yeah.
Well, you did an amazing job with this. As I told you offline, I couldn't put it down. I was wondering, all right, what's the answer? What's the solution to all this? And you hit it pretty hard at the end. So let's kind of talk about the problem first. And for those of you listening, and all you've heard so far is nuns, we're not talking about Catholic nuns. We're talking about NONES. So who are these nuns? How did this come about? Who created this name of the nuns?
It's a very, I want to say almost a new phenomenon that social scientists have been studying, particularly of late, which is when they would do these general social surveys and asking people about religious things. Are you a Catholic? Are you a Presbyterian? Are you a Protestant? Are you a Baptist? What are you? They would always have at the bottom, I'm nothing or none. Mm. And it was fairly consistent at about maybe 5%. 3 to 5% of the American population, and that was fairly echoed in other Western countries, but about 5% for survey after survey, year after year after year. Then all of a sudden, boom! It just started to rise in a way that was unbelievable. The time I wrote that book, the nuns were the second largest and fastest growing category under religion in the United States. They are now the largest and still the fastest growing. So you're talking, people under the age of 35, it's approaching 40 and 50% will put themselves in that category. None of the above. Now, they're not saying they're atheists. They're just religiously affiliated.
So it's not atheist. They don't.
No, atheism actually has stayed pretty steady, although it is a higher percentage among Generation C, the youngest chronicle generation. They run at about a double the rate on atheism, but we can talk about the reasons for that. But the most obvious one is that they're the first generation that's been raised in what would be called a post-Christian context.
And why? Where did we go wrong?
Well, depending upon whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, you say, where did we go right or where did we go wrong? I'm speaking personally as a Christ follower. And so I would say that there were several things that added to this. I have a foot in the social sciences, so I could give you the big names of secularization and those kinds of processes that are happening. But the heart of the matter is that, every generation is a fresh generation, and they're going to make decisions of their own related to spiritual things. And I think that in a lot of ways, it's an indictment of both Christians and the church that people would look and say, well, yes, I believe in God. And yes, I think Jesus was someone that I can admire, but I want very little to do with Christianity. And I certainly don't want anything to do with the church. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, and they'll tell you what they are. And I've outlined them in the book. They'll say, look, you guys are intolerant. You are hypocritical. You're not very nice to each other, much less to other people. I've been to the services. They're boring. They're irrelevant. They're lifeless. They're dead. And one guy I remember in a survey said, "I've got enough problems in my life. Why would I go to church and get more?"
I remember you said.
And so it's not like they're that they don't have reasons. And I would say it's legitimate reasons. I mean, I don't argue with any of that. I just would say, listen, I understand that Christians disappoint, but don't make that Jesus. Christians will disappoint you, but I would argue Jesus will not. And so don't let, for example, you come spend a day with me, and as a pastor, and as someone who is a professing Christ follower, you come spend a day with me, and I'll disappoint you. I will. I hopefully not in ways that are blatant and unblushing, but I'm a sin-stained, sin-soaked man who needs to drink deeply from the well of God's grace every day. But don't confuse me with whether or not Jesus was who he said he was, or what the Christian faith is valid. And so I think that's the beginning point of most of my conversations with people who are disenfranchised or disillusioned. I would say, look, hey, I get it. Me too. I didn't become a Christian until I was in my 20s. So I understand. But at least look at Jesus and determine where you stand with him and what you think about him and what he said. Not, and here's an analogy I've used a bunch. If you were to hear like a fifth grade garage band tackle Metallica, and then I would just say, okay, I want you to go. I've got a friend there who's never heard Metallica. They've never heard Enter the Sandman or anything like that. You're going to go hear this fifth grade garage band try to pull it off. And I want you to tell me whether you think Metallica has got good music. And, you say, don't do that. They're going to butcher it.
That's good.
And I would say, yeah, they probably will. So don't look at my fifth grade attempt at the Christ life and make judgments about Christ.
So, okay. And so I think that's even something I struggle with. So let's just say you use that Metallica example, how do you ever, if they can't actually hear the real band, and does that make sense? Like, how do you explain it? How does someone like me, I'm still learning, I'm still trying to get some of these big questions answered myself. Because a lot of it is explanation, right? Because
it is explanation. And so what for me, for example, and I'm in a relationship with, several people who aren't Christians and have always am. As I mentioned to you earlier, the church that I lead, 70% of our total growth comes from people who were previously unchurched. So all I do is essentially I'm a pastor to the unchurched and seeking and the exploring as they're exploring Christianity. And so one of the things that we do and I do is just create a climate where it's okay to ask anything. Let's make it clear that I'm not perfect. But I will say that the deepest needs of my life have been intersected by Christ. Mm-hmm. And when you see that sin in my life, when you see the way I fail, all I can tell you is imagine what I would be like if I wasn't with Christ. Mm. And I think that's the real point. It's not like, well, gosh, here's this person who's struggling and they say they're a Christian. Oh, you should have seen them before Christ. That's the real miracle, and that's the real thing. So I just would always encourage people, look, let's just start with Jesus. Let's not get into the church. Let's not get into hypocrites or anything like that, because that has nothing to do with Jesus. Let's look at him. Who did he say he was? What claims did he make? What, and then decide where you stand on that, and then kind of work outward from that. So, because most people's problems with the Christian faith, most people's problem with the church, and any type of religion, it doesn't even have to be just Christianity, it usually has to do with someone's failed performance.
Yes. And
not really the faith itself. And so I always just try to, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I totally commiserate with all the crap that's out there and all the ways that people have been wounded and all the hypocrisy and legalism and everything else. And it's heartbreaking. But if it's any consolation, it's heartbreaking to God too. Yeah.
In my opinion, this year set Christians back a little bit. We have a big presence on social media, and I spent a decent amount of time on there. And with this election and the stuff I saw coming out of people I know who say they're Christian, it was the opposite of love. I know you talk about truth and grace. It was just the absolute opposite. And I'm putting myself in a nun's shoes, reading that about someone claiming they're Christian and how they were talking back to someone on social media. I was just like, oh my goodness.
Well, and sadly, brutal. It wasn't confined to politics. It's race and issues of so many things. It's been a troubling year where almost like somebody lanced a wound, and all this came out, and it's been a difficult thing. But at the same time, it's also given a lot of people the opportunity. They may have seen Christians at their worst, but hopefully they've also had some opportunity to see Christians at their best and Christianity at its best. Yep. But yeah, it's been a crazy year.
But one good thing, at least I don't remember the exact stat, but it was a high number, like 80% of these nuns that were in these surveys had said, had they been asked by a good friend or someone that they liked and trusted to go to a church, to attend one church, that they would most likely do it. Right.
Yeah. And it's again, if it's within a context of a trusted friend, a family member, a neighbor, someone they work with, most people are not put off by saying, hey, check out, in our case, check out Mecklenburg online and check out the online campus and see what you think. In fact, we're finding that more people feel comfortable doing that than they ever did physically. But they're wide open to that, because people are not closed to spirituality. What they'll tell you is, I'm spiritual but not religious, and so that's fine. Let's start with that spirituality. But spirituality is kind of like a rope. It matters what it's tied to. So what do you got yours tied to? And if you say, well, this, that, or the other, sometimes I say, what, it sounds like your spirituality is tied to the echo sound of your own voice. If you really want authentic spirituality, it's something outside of you. It's transcendent. And so, whether it's Christianity or not, let's go on an exploration of what you're going to tie your rope to, because that's what authentic spirituality is, something outside of yourself that develops you in a spiritual sense.
Let's also say on the flip side that as Christians, we're now doing maybe not the best job of inviting those people, right? I know you talk a little bit about in the book, because it hit me hard at a church we were with. It looking back now, it definitely was there to kind of serve its members. It was not doing what you guys do at MEC. It was not going out and purposefully going out and reaching the unchurched. It was kind of like, some stranger, a bum comes off the street. It was almost like, I know you gave a couple stories there where did not happen in our church, but it felt like it probably would have. No strangers just walked in. But you gave a story here of, if you guys are listening, where someone, let's just say it was off the streets, a hooker or whatever it is, just someone who didn't fit in the mold, and they were basically asked to leave, that you don't really fit in here. And you have another example. I think it was a preacher in Texas or wherever, and he was a Baptist, and he said, why isn't the church growing? He's like, well, there's just not enough Baptists here anymore. And so clearly not going after the unchurched. Are these nuns even seeking? Like they're not against God,
this
right?
is another thing that's creating the rise.
Yeah.
Is that you have the average person saying, God, yes, church, no, Christianity, maybe. Mm-hmm. So they're not really in search mode anymore. And there's nothing in culture enticing them to be. They're normal. They're the normal ones. Then you have over here, and again, I don't want to paint with too broad of a stroke, but I don't mind, being. This is an area, though, I think the church needs to be critiqued, and a lot of Christians need to be critiqued. They just don't care. They just don't give a flip. They don't have a heart that beats for people far from God. They're in it all about themselves, and their church is all about meeting their felt needs, and they talk a good talk about maybe reaching out or caring for people, but it's not really fleshed out in any tangible ways. And it's where the needs of the believer, the needs of the individual, are all that matters. And so churches become feeding stations for the already convinced. And so, Christians talk about where they can be served as opposed to how they can serve, being ministered to as opposed to them being ministers. They talk about being fed all the time as opposed to how they could feed other people. So there just isn't an outward basis. And this is so ironic, because Jesus was all about saying, I have come to seek and to save the lost. It's not the well that I'm after, it's the ones that are not well. Everything about his life was turned outward and outward and outward, trying to reach people, even to the point when he was hanging on the cross. He was working to reach one more, even as he hung there in his agony. So, the passion of Jesus was reaching others. And what I would say to my Christian brothers and sisters that might be listening, you're going to have all of eternity to worship. You're going to have all of eternity to grow and be discipled and learn. You're going to have all of eternity to do everything that you're so consumed with right now. You have this one and only life to reach someone for Christ, to share that message, this one and only life. And I really do believe, again, I may be being too strong and getting off wind here about where you're wanting to talk about, but I really do believe this generation of Christians will stand before God and give an account for this generation of non-Christians and what we did. I really do.
So here's I still think the struggle, and you talk about it in the book. I think you used you used CarMax as an example, and you used a pretty simple scale that we all get from basically a 1 to a 10. And the nuns are down here in the 3 range, maybe even 1. And you have, maybe a pastor is at 9 or 10. I don't know. And then a lot of us who, like me, who read this book, and we're somewhere, in the middle or closer to the 7 or 8 range. Where do you start that conversation? Besides inviting them to the church, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, where do you even start that conversation?
Yeah. But the purpose, the whole point of that scale that you're referring to is the average, where the average person in today's world is in relation to the Christian faith, in terms of their background, their knowledge, their experience, etc. And back, and I'm talking about the average unchurched non-Christian. Where are they in terms of starting point? And 30 years ago, I'd argue they were and if 10 is that moment you become a Christian, say, you decide that that's what you're going to do and to be, and pursue that and as a step of faith. 30 years ago, the average unchurched non-Christian was sitting on an 8. I mean, they had so much in their background. They believed in truth. They believed in God. They had a positive background in the church. They had a basic fundamental knowledge of the Christian faith. And they had respect for Christian leaders. And there was just so much in there that they just kind of needed a bump, you know, and that was what was so, powerful, for example, about the rallies of Billy Graham in his heyday. Literally, people, one night, one conversation, and people could be bumped from an 8 to a 10 in a very legitimate, powerful, moving way, because it all came together for them. Now the average person who is unchurched and not a Christian is got maybe a 2 or a 3. They don't have a positive view of Christian leaders. They don't have a positive background in the church. If they did have a background, it was negative. They don't have a lot of knowledge of the Christian faith, and on it goes. And so when you're starting with someone as a 2 or a 3, you're realizing that the whole journey is going to be process leading up to hopefully an event. And I've argued that the heart of that process is explanation. It's helping people. First of all, if I'm the one in relationship with them, it's letting them see how Christ has intersected the needs of my life, how he's affected my marriage, my finances, my work, the way I treat others, the way I raise my children. And then hopefully they'll see maybe something in my life that they don't have, or that they're intrigued by, or they're attracted to. And then along with that relationship, I mean, we're doing a lot of stuff together, going out fishing, doing whatever, and spiritual conversations naturally come up. I'm not just trying to ram stuff down their throat all the time, but they ask questions and I give answers and we just talk, or I might ask leading questions. And that's where the explanation all comes into play. And then coupled in with that, at least at MEC, we have the wonderful ability to say to folks, hey, why don't you come and see, come and hear, come and explore. And in a context of a church that really is kind of a church for the unchurched, a church that really is different, a church that will help explain things, a church where it's safe to come when you're still not a Christian. Let's say a church that is going to help with your questions. And people are still doing that. I mean, obviously, we haven't been open physically for weekend services, but our online campus has just exploded even beyond what it was. And people are still doing that very same thing. Check it out online, and see and hear. We for example, there was one. Here's a cool way it's happening. Charlotte's got its headquarters for Wells Fargo Bank, and we've got MEC's a large church. We have over 10,000 active attenders, but there were some folks that attend MEC who worked at Wells Fargo. And their one division, they had one particular place where people were not working at home, but having to come in. And one person started taking their lunch break and watching MEC's online campus because we had a Tuesday noon viewing. And then that person invited another person. And then they started talking about it, invited more and more. And this one person watching the online campus in a break room, now I've been told is attracting 30, 40 people crammed in there. Awesome. Christians, non-Christians, Hindus, Muslims, all watching this, learning about the Christian faith and talking about it among themselves. And they call themselves a Wells Fargo team group that gets together every week. Huh. And so it can happen in wonderful, relational, invitational ways.
Yeah, I love it. So thank you for clearing up the 1 to 10. I was way off on my one side. Talk about grace and truth, because that one hit me hard. Well, kind of at the right time, just with all the stuff going on, like you said, with the politics and racial tension and all that. And I felt like I had failed in a lot of areas there as well, in terms of kind of snap judgments of people that might not believe the same thing I do with everything going on. And you had a really neat kind of a chart or a scale as well on grace and truth. You mind talking about that real quick and how that fits in with us?
If anyone were to read one of the 4 biographies of Jesus in the New Testament, particularly the one that was written by a man named John, he begins very kind of theological, very almost philosophical about, the God become flesh, and he goes into this huge opening prologue of this incredible thing of the incarnation, which we're obviously celebrating with Christmas. The God man, the Word become flesh. This was who Christians believe Jesus was, that he was God himself in human form, fully God, fully man. Well, John gives this big prologue. And then at the very end, it's like he buried the lead. At the very end of all this language, this lofty language, he said, and he came to bring grace and truth. Drop the mic. So that's the dynamic of the Christian faith, grace and truth. And sadly, we just like we can't ever get it. We either swing heavy toward the grace side and we lose truth, or we hang toward the truth side and we lose grace. Truth without grace is just legalism and judgmentalism. Yeah. Grace without truth is just licentiousness. I mean, it's both. It's bringing both to bear, grace and truth. And that's what Jesus did so masterfully. And when you read about his life in those biographies, he would, talk about people's need for God, and even the sin in their lives and all that. And then when he would get done, they'd say, "This was so amazing. When you come to our keg party tonight, I got a whole bunch of other friends I want you to tell them about. They're all sleeping in the wrong beds too. So come on." So how did Jesus pull that off? Because with the truth was grace. People knew that this was a man who accepted them and loved them, and brought both to bear. And that's spiritually intoxicating. It's also exactly what we need. We don't want a spirituality devoid of truth. We desperately need truth. I need to know what's wrong with my life. I need to know where I'm screwing up. I need to know if I have a particular pattern of behaviors or attitudes that are undermining my life and they're toxic. Even if they're on the surface pleasurable, they're poisoning me. It's maybe a slow death, but it's a death. I need that truth. I also desperately need grace, because I'm a sin-stained, sin-soaked man who it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. So, and I desperately need to be able to pray to God without awkwardness about my sin and about my need for forgiveness and about, I am so sorry. I am so sorry, and to be able to drink deeply from that well of grace. It's what sets Christianity apart. Is this truth grace dynamic, and particularly, the truth is a given, but we forget how powerful the grace is. There was someone who is fairly well known in Christian circles, a guy by the name of C.S. Lewis, and he himself traveled to faith from atheism and became a Christian largely through his intellect and analyzing it. He's a brilliant man, taught at Oxford and then later at Cambridge, and there was a conference on comparative religions that was taking place at Oxford, and he was invited to it, but he was running late. And so they were having this really robust conversation about what was unique, if anything, about the Christian faith in relation to other world religions. And they were going through various dynamics about, well, is this what really sets it apart? Is this what sets it apart? And he's like, no, I don't think that's it. Lewis walks into the room and he asked them what they were talking about. And they told him, and he said, oh, that's easy. It's grace. And they thought about it and they had to agree.
Powerful. You remind me a lot of him. And I know you quoted him quite a bit in the.
Well, I studied at Oxford, and he was instrumental in my own, faith development and walk, my most recent book, which you and I were talking about offline, is called Christianity for People Who Aren't Christians, and it was written for non-Christians, and received permission from the C.S. Lewis Foundation to kind of have him as an accomplice as I went through borrowing and updating much of his classic Mere Christianity. They were very kind to allow that kind of book to be written. So yes, I'm a deep fan of Jack. That's why they call him Jack. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound C.S. Lewis.
I want to talk about leading into really the solution. I know at some point in the book you mentioned a lot about church, both the right way and a wrong way. It's not just about slapping on some tight jeans and serving better coffee and turning the music up, even though some have done that very successfully. You mentioned, I think you said the word Jesus, created community, and you reference, the need for church and the need to don't do this, meaning don't do your journey on your own, right? You need community. You need to hit people. I mean, I've been there dealt with cancer, and I realized how powerful a community of Christians who were legitimately praying over you and thinking about you. That was the first time. It was 28, and when it hit me, I was like, all right, I get it. Do you mind talking about that, which is, kind of the solution of doing Christianity, and kind of really the next steps, regardless of where you are on the journey, listen to this, what are the next steps?
Yeah. Well, if and again, this is outside of a relationship, and, what would probably be, multiple cups of coffee or craft beers, and just in a conversation with someone.
Yeah.
I would say, okay, focus your exploration on Jesus and who he said he was. He said he was God himself in human form who came to planet Earth to show the way. He either was or he wasn't. So settle that one. You can't just say he was a good man, and you can't just say he was a prophet. That doesn't, he either was insane, a liar, or he was who he said he was. So settle that one. Second, I would say, I think it's best to explore the Christian faith and community, one that's safe, that's answering your questions, and whether you buy the answers or not, where the questions are legal and you're being encouraged and helped, and somebody or community is helping put forward Christianity raw and unfiltered for you to really engage. Look for a church if you're either an explorer, but certainly if you're a Christ follower and you've crossed that line, you need to get involved in a community. You need to, it's not meant to be done in isolation. It's not a solo effort. And you need to be in some type of relationship with others for mutual encouragement and support. And we just need that as human beings, and particularly in relation to our spiritual lives. Yeah. And so, there are good, healthy, functional churches out there, just like there are good, healthy, functional families. We all know there can be dysfunctional families. There can be dysfunctional church families. And so, run away from those, but there's some healthy ones out there, not perfect, but healthy, and become a part of one. And then, then that involvement will help you. I mean, a healthy community of faith will, have all kinds of tools and resources and steps and journeys and things for your ongoing growth and development, and particularly your own ability to turn around and serve and care for others and extend the message and person of Christ to others.
And I'd love for you to share your website where people can go watch you guys online. I know you guys are
the church is Mecklenburg Community Church, and it's called that because I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the county is Mecklenburg. So it's not weird around here. Like, why are you Mecklenburg? Around here, it's like, well, hey, how you stole the name? You got the name. But so it's Mecklenburg.org. MECKLENBURG.org. That's the church. And that'll take you to our on-campus, our online campus. And there's all kinds of viewings every week. And then I have a site called churchandculture.com that is where people can read my blogs and subscribe to those for free. And There's all kinds of resources there, but churchandculture.com. So, I think it's also churchandculture.org. Anyway, it's all, I think it both domains will get you there, but Church and Culture. And those are the two main ways.
Yeah, I'll put those in the show notes. And I think, I don't know that it was something to celebrate, but I have heard from countless people. I actually can't count them because it has been so many who have been listening. I've been doing this Unchurched series now every week for a little over a year. And as soon as this whole COVID thing happened, and pretty much all churches across America were shut down for some time, if not still going on, I believe you guys are as well, are still kind of down and mostly online. There's been a lot of people who have reached out who have said they heard some podcast or, some lesson that we did. And usually the call to action is to go join a community and, not to have just some podcast be your church. It's a great starting point. It hopefully can answer a question. But I think it took a lot. I'm talking about a positive here. It took a lot of the tension off. A lot of people have written me and said, I had the fear of walking to the church, not necessarily because I got burned, but because their last memory was maybe at I was a Catholic Episcopalian. It was all these rituals. Do I go up there? Am I supposed to take the bread and the wine? What do I dip it? It was almost this fear of looking dumb. We all have egos. I have one. I struggle with sometimes, and there's always that fear of looking like an idiot, not knowing what to do, and people judging me. And especially according to your book, one of the top things that the nuns are saying about Christians is judgmental. So already they're thinking, all right, I'm going to go here and be judged. And I think it took a lot of that tension off and even some of that fear to be able to sit there in their pajamas and watch a church service.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I like this guy. I like what he's saying. Like, I can relate to him. He's honest. He talks about his sins, and he's not some guy or gal up there who's just saying I'm perfect. And, if you have anything wrong with you, you're a bad person. So I think that part was kind of neat because I keep hearing that over and over again that there, and you're probably seeing it, right? I'm sure in terms of eyeballs, you guys.
Absolutely. We already had the majority of the people who attended MAC check us out online first, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And so it was very natural for us. Our church is very young, made up of a lot of 20 and 30 somethings. And, so they were digital natives, and that was their comfort zone. So it's been very natural for that to almost like not even skip a beat. As terrible as all this has been, it wasn't a disruptor for us in that sense.
Yeah. And are you still online right now?
Yeah.
You said? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we'll always be. We had an online campus long before this. We'll always do that, and we have. But we're not meeting in person on weekends still.
Okay. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the bigger churches like that, it's going to be, do you guys have a date, or is it still like to be determined?
Well, obviously every city and every county is different in terms of the degree of the outbreak. For us, if we were to follow what the health guidelines were being asked to, obviously we'd have social distancing, masking. They would say, don't sing. That's really bad. Don't pass communion, or just don't touch each other. Don't embrace. And children's ministry can't be done the way we were doing it.
Yeah.
Block off every other row, have 6 feet. And at some point it was like, okay, why bother? This would force still the vast majority of our attenders to stay at home, because we'd only be able to handle just so many. And so, and then that would take away our ability to serve the online as robustly as we are. And our people are fine with it. They get it. And it was never politicized among our people. Mm-hmm. And so, even though we're a very diverse church, community ran just too deep for us. And so we just kind of said, okay, we're just going to go through this with a love our neighbor mentality. And we're just not going to become a super spreader event, and particularly a church our size. Yeah. So we're going to just keep watching and seeing how the vaccine rolls out and when it gets here. And, right now it's getting very bad in North Carolina and Charlotte in particular. And so we know we've got a good, 8-10 weeks of it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah. Well, we'll be praying for you guys. Thank you so much for the time. I know you're a busy man right now, and
I'm honored to be invited on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And everyone, I would highly encourage you to read this book. You have two other ones here on the side, Christianity for people who aren't Christians. That's the latest one, right?
And that's the one I would recommend for people who would not consider themselves a Christ follower.
That's the one I just bought. And then Meet Generation Z. That was the one prior to that. And I have not read that one yet either, but I'm pumped. This one hit me so hard, and you're just such a talented writer, and you're able to put some, I don't know, kind of complicated a little bit, right? And in some terms that, I don't know, I would struggle to write something like this, and you just made it so easy to read and had me just continually wanted to turn pages. So thank you so much.
That's encouraging. Thank you.
And everyone, please go check out Mech online. I'll put all the links at the show notes, and you can go see all the past episodes at saltstrong.com/unchurched, or just Google Saltstrong Unchurched, and you'll see all of them right there. But Dr. James, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
This was really great. And I know there are people who struggle to read an entire book, including my own wife. And so she loves stuff like this. She's like, all right, I get the cliff notes, if you will. So thank you again, my friend.
Thank you, Brett. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.